Hello, everybody, and thanks once again for joining us for another live broadcast. Tonight is going to be absolutely fantastic. We have got Brendan Barry tonight, all things analog, and this kind of stuff is right up my street. I'm really looking forward to it. Now, while we're waiting for everyone to get into the stream, what we've got here is album of the month. Now, there's a reason for that one right there. Rest in peace, Ozzy. And there's the album, and there's a little clue for you. The first person to get that album, I've just told you who it is. First person to get that album. Now, right down here where you are watching from, we have got here Brian from Scotland. Thanks for joining us, Brian. We have got Alan from West Suffolk. We've got Karen from Good Evening. We've got Martin from Essex. Go on, Essex. Elisa from Switzerland. Okay, while that's all coming through, let's explain the session. Yes, so we've got Brendan Barry coming on in a minute. He's going to tell us how to make cameras out of literally anything, and it is such good fun. It is absolutely brilliant. Then Brendan's going to do the session, do his presentation, and if there's any questions that you want to ask that is relevant to what's being said at that time, type them into the comments here, and Brendan will answer them. It's as simple as that. If they're not relevant to that moment in time, then what I'll do is I'll jot them down on my bit of paper here, and we will come back to them at the end, because we will have a Q&A session at the end. It's going to last approximately an hour, with some Q&A at the end. Here we go. We've got Alexander from Russia here. Thanks for joining us, Alex. Brian's only cracked it. Look, there you go. It's Paranoid by the one and only Black Sabbath, and God rest his soul. Creo from Ireland. Right. Yep, Alan, you got it, but you was a bit late there, mate. You was a bit late. Brian got in there first. Right. Let's bring Brendan into the stream, and he can introduce himself. Hello, Brendan.
Hello.
How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, no, it's a pleasure, and I'm really looking forward to it. Brendan, introduce yourself, mate. And just for, I don't know, people can help me here. I think we've got a stream issue. If it's a bit blurry from where you're watching, just let us know in the comments, all right? Because we don't sometimes see what you see this side. But Brendan, just introduce yourself, and then I'm going to put your presentation up, and I'm going to leave it all up to you, mate.
Okay. Hello. Yeah, I'm Brendan Barry. I'm a photographer, camera maker, educator, facilitator from, I live in Devon in Exeter. I'm about to move up to Dartmoor, and yeah, really looking forward to talking to everyone tonight and sharing some of the weird and wonderful things that I've got up to over the last bunch of years.
Yeah, and they are weird and wonderful. They're absolutely brilliant. Right, Brendan, I'm going to put your presentation on the screen. It's on the screen now. For everyone else, there's details underneath there, scrolling across your screen. If you want to follow Brendan, go to his website. There's the details there, and we'll also come back to them at the end. Brendan, it's over to you now, and let's go.
Okay, thank you very much. Yeah, so I titled this talk Handmade Cameras, Making Spaces to Make Things In, because I work primarily inside a camera and or darkroom. And this talk's going to be a bit of a kind of, I suppose, a sort of journey. I used to teach photography, and I'm well aware of the phrase "death by PowerPoint" and that you shouldn't put too many slides in a PowerPoint. However, I've completely thrown it out the window. There are over 350 slides in this PowerPoint. It hopefully will make sense. It's kind of an obsessive bombardment of imagery and inventions. So I'm hoping that you know, and I've done stuff like this before, and it's a kind of representation of the obsessive nature of my approach to photography, I suppose, which I want to kind of communicate and share and hopefully potentially even inspire a little bit with. So I'm going to, as I said, kind of take this on a sort of my kind of journey through photography, and at key points, like the kind of shifts and changes that have made me arrive at where I am. Like I said, I used to teach photography, and I would often program speakers and people talking, and I always sort of thought there's sort of two types of photographers, or two types of speakers, those that presented their work since they'd established their practice. So like, this is what I do, this is all really good stuff, and this is my approach to photography, or whatever it might be, which is great. But I think especially for people learning photography, students or enthusiasts, or anyone who's kind of interested in taking a journey through the creative industries and working as a photographer, whether it's professionally or just kind of, you know, as a hobby, I think seeing that kind of journey and seeing how someone ended up where they are personally, I find really interesting, and I like following those journeys. So that's how I've sort of approached this. So fundamentally, there's three ways that I work. I have essentially kind of three jobs that are all interlinked. So I make work. I have a fine art photography practice, which primarily at the moment is work like you can see here, photographs of flowers I make in the studio. I have another element to my practice, which is where I build kind of cameras and darkrooms and facilitate other people working in those spaces. And then I also run a community art center where I kind of, you know, work with and facilitate other projects and bring in other artists and people to present work, basically, to make work. And I'm going to focus mostly on the sort of middle section here, the kind of more collaborative stuff, but kind of touch on the other two at the end. And I'll probably run out of time because I ramble, which I'm already doing. And you know, but if I run out of time for that, that's the the more meaty stuff. I think the more interesting things is the stuff in the middle there. So I said I'd talk a little bit about my journey. So without going into, you don't need to every single step of the way, but I went to university, I studied photography, and I spent 3 years getting stoned, walking around Dartmoor, taking pictures of trees. And I took lots of great pictures of trees and landscape stuff, which I was, you know, quite happy with. And then I finished my degree and was like, great, I'm a photographer. Give me a job taking pictures of trees. Of course, that doesn't really exist. No one's going to pay you to just suddenly start photographing the things that you want to. So I ended up in the wilderness years for many years, photographing anything and everything, just jobbing photographer, commercial stuff, primarily products. I had a job photographing brass band tournaments all around the UK. But it was quite an interesting time because it kind of honed my skills, social skills, as well as technical and practical skills, and kind of, you know, it was just, you know, paying the bills, and I was earning a living from the thing that I loved. The problem was that actually, although I was doing the thing that I loved, I wasn't necessarily involved or photographing or in, you know, around things that I was that interested in. I'm nothing against brass band tournaments, but it's not my personal favorite. So I ended up sort of stepping away a little bit. I stopped working as a photographer or in that world. I got a bar job. I lived abroad for a bit. And then I started taking pictures again because my job wasn't kind of, you know, if you're working all day doing something and when you finish, then it's the space to then go and create and do the thing that you want to do isn't really there, especially if it's, you know, something you're not working in an area within your subject that you're particularly interested in. So I started taking the pictures again after taking a bit of a break, and then I went back and went back. I did an MA in photography basically, and I went back to study, and that's when I decided to hitchhike across America. I'd always been I was two types of photographers. There's photographers who put themselves in front of something interesting. So you head out into the world, you're a documentary photographer, landscape, photojournalist, that kind of thing. Or you put something interesting in front of yourself. So you work more in studio, portraits, still lifes, that kind of thing. Of course, there's interesting spaces in between them where the observed and the constructed world meet. And so it's not always that binary, but I was definitely in the former camp, head out, looking for interesting things. So again, I don't want to touch on this too much, but it'll, you know, get bogged down in this too much, but it is relevant to kind of my journey, I suppose. So I immersed myself in American literature. I'm a kid of the 80s, so I'd grown up with American movies and music and all that kind of stuff. So I was reading lots of American short story writers and watching road movies, basically. And then I bought a plane ticket to Washington, DC, and 6 weeks later I had a flight out of San Francisco. And it's a long, there's another whole talk about that specific trip and two other trips that followed. But basically and this is the routes I took. So the blue route's the first one, and then the second is the black route through the Midwest, and the third trip I took was across the top. And I was trying to hitchhike. Again, long story short, I was a bit stuck. I ended up in Louisiana, in New Orleans, in Louisiana, and I bought a car off a woman that I met in the street, $300, and set off west in this car. And I was shooting with a large format camera, so you can see my camera, the roof of the car there. So it's very slow. It takes time to take out and fold out, and load sheets of film in one at a time, or two-sided. So up until this point, I was really hard to make pictures, because if you're hitching a ride with someone or you're a Greyhound bus, you can't just point your camera out the window and take a shot, or ask someone to pull in and, oh, can I just get a quick picture of this? So I carried on this journey, and I was making these photographs, things like this. These are kind of classic American road trip, kind of man on side of road, looking at things, photography, meeting people, portraiture, and I was interested in the kind of, you know, the mundane and the banal and the kind of the fallacy of the American dream, and all these sort of themes that were tied into this work. And some of, you know, it's like shooting fish in a barrel driving through America, especially through the Midwest and places like that. There's these incredible landscapes, these weird and wonderful things that you come across. This guy's the most depressed person I've ever met. Poor bloke was just stood there handing out cheese samples, God. And, you know, I made this work, and I was very proud of it at the time, and still am to some extent. You know, there's some strong pictures here. But when I came back from this trip, and I finished the course, I needed to get a job, and again, no one's paying you to do this. I've self-funded these trips. And I ended up, again, it's a long story, but I started teaching. So I was teaching photography, and was starting to get more and more interested in kind of more collaborative work, and kind of obviously educating, but not just as a job, but as a kind of part of my practice, as a kind of approach. And I had this experience where I was starting to sort of disconnect from these photographs. The way I often think about it is, I'll come back to this slide actually, I'll leave it here for a sec, is I was like playing the role of a photographer. So there is this kind of approach to photography where you photograph a landscape and a person and maybe a close-up or a detail, and you weave them together and you create these kind of narratives, less like a kind of like a novel, but more like a poem in a way, like a series of images that together create a kind of mood or a kind of broader narrative. And this was quite somber, as you can see. It's quite kind of lonely and depressive, and I stayed away from kind of cities and kept to the backgrounds. And this, again, that element of the fantasy of the American dream, these kind of themes I was interested in. But the work, it felt very derivative of other people that I was interested in. I was other photographers, that people like Alex Soth and Joel Sternfeld, Stephen Shaw, who were big influences on me. And I just kind of felt that the work just wasn't really, for want of a better phrase, wasn't really me. I was kind of, as I said before, like playing the role of a photographer, like there's a sort of formula that I was kind of working within. And not to disrespect that approach, there's some incredible artists and photographers that work in that way that are real. But essentially, I just saw all of these pictures as like a kind of B-sides to other projects that I was interested in. It's like these pictures would be a filler photograph in someone else's book, basically. And I'm not trying to kind of, like I said, I'm proud of the pictures, but there was something missing from it all, basically. And then I had this experience where I met this photographer called Jason Evans, who was a hero of mine. Now I feel very privileged to call a close friend. He's kind of a mentor to me as well, and he'll come up quite a bit in this talk, I imagine. And I had this big stack of photographs, this America work, and I had this portfolio review, and I showed him the pictures, and he went through them, and he had to put them into 3 piles, and it's like, yeah, that's a good picture, that's all right, and shit, that's okay, that's a good picture, that's all right, and separated this big stack of about 300 photographs into these 3 piles. And he said, right, do you want me to tell you the truth, or do you want me to tell you what you want to hear? And I said, I want you to tell me I want to tell me the truth, and I can take it as well. I'm already feeling a bit disconnected from this work. I feel like I need to finish it, and needs another trip or something like this. And he's like, well, you've got a bunch of photographs that look like photographs. What do you want me to tell you? And he said, if it sounds like you're not that bothered about this work anymore. And it's like, well, at this point, I was already interested in other things and building cameras and making things. And I said, yeah, I'm just not that excited about it. Well, then forget about it. Put it in a box, put it under your bed. Maybe you'll come back to it one day, maybe you won't. And it was basically like being given permission to just sort of move on from it and not give up or disregard or throw away, but just to kind of move on. Like, don't get bogged down by something that you feel you have to finish. There are times when it is important to resolve things and finish them, but in this context, I needed to move on from this thing because it felt like it wasn't really me and it wasn't really working. So the talk kind of jumps around chronologically, but there's a kind of overarching kind of like sense to the kind of journey, if you like. So I was around this time of this conversation with Jason happened. I was teaching photography, and one of the first things you do, we would do with our students, A-level photography, we would make pinhole cameras. No better way to learn the real basics of photography, or one of the best ways to, is with a pinhole camera. Make your own camera, put photographic paper inside it. And we did that every year. And I think it was maybe the 2nd or 3rd year that I'd been doing it. And I tend to get bored if I do the same thing over and over again. I'm always looking for ways to make it more exciting or innovate it. And I looked at this bin in the corner of the classroom and was like, hang on a sec, like a shoebox camera, pinhole camera is made out of a shoebox. You could do the same thing in a bin. The concept translates. Now, of course, thousands of people have done this, but at this point, this was sort of before YouTube and the internet was, you could just see everything with your fingers. So it was a revelation to me at the time. As I said, lots of other people who had already had that revelation was like, if I can make a camera out of a bin, and these are the pictures that we took with it, then I can maybe follow my dream and build my own bigger camera. So I'd always wanted to make my own camera. So I decided to build a 16 by 20 inch camera. The reason I went really big rather than something smaller is because there's a lot more margin for error. So if you're a couple of millimeters out on a 16 by 20 inch camera, a big plate camera, then it doesn't matter so much. Small cameras have to be more precise, and I'm not really that precise. So this was the first prototype, the Slug. So it's basically a lens on a board with a pond liner, and at the back there was a screen and the ground glass, which is this thing I'm holding up in this picture where you can view the image. And I put it in a studio. This is at college where I was working, put my friend in front of it and made this picture direct onto photographic paper. went back and kind of designed a little bit more, made a sort of bit more precise sort of, you know, parts to it, and a thing that you could take, a film holder, so you could take, or paper holder, and then made a big massive set of bellows, and this was my first kind of proper camera that I built. And it worked miraculously. And this was a picture I took when I met Jason, actually, on this residency thing that I was doing. So then I just got obsessed with building cameras, and I just would walk around seeing things. And so I made a camera out of an old enlarger. This is my old enlarger camera. I made one out of Lego. This is a large format Lego camera. Pineapple camera. This one has a fixed focal length, and the focal length is of arm's reach away. So it's like it's a really good selfie camera, basically. It's about it you can do with it. I did, however, accidentally leave it at college over the Easter holidays and in a plastic bag on my desk, and the college was locked, so I couldn't get back in, and it looked a bit of a stick when I got back. This is marked a bit more handheld. Log camera. And I kind of just started interested in, like, and these are all, a camera is just a box with a lens on one end and something that reads light, whether it's a digital sensor or you know, a film plane where you put light sensitive material. So, but I was really interested in, like, what a camera is, like, this is, if you take apart a 35mm camera, this is what you get inside. You take apart most of my cameras, and it's pretty simple. It's just like, you know, it's just an empty box, basically, because they're not quite as advanced, let's say, as most of a Nikon FM2, for instance. But I was just really interested in, like, how things worked, you know, and I'd always been a bit like that. I'd always take apart my toys when I was a kid, to much to my parents' dismay. And I was just making stuff and having so much fun. And it was about, like, I was, you know, breaking down the preconceptions of what a camera is, what it does, understanding the mechanics of them a bit more. But also, like I said, it was playful, it was fun. And I was getting these really interesting reactions from people. This was a lens that I built, or a kind of mechanical iris, actually. This is, you know, so I was looking at how does an iris work on a lens, you know, how does, you know, I never ground my own glass to make the glass of the lens, but I started getting interested in that and all these sorts of things. This is my bread cameras, Mark 1 and 2. And these all work, by the way. These are all functioning cameras. Watermelon camera, mannequin camera, which you saw I've seen on the poster, butternut squash camera, accordion, because it's already got built-in bellow movement, so that was a kind of no-brainer. And then I couldn't resist cheese, proper cheese, say cheese camera, obviously. And then Halloween along, and you know, obviously. And then this is the world, well, possibly the world's most impractical, importable, lowest quality and resolution digital camera. So this actually has it's an old overhead projector with a flatbed scanner at the bottom, and a lens and set of bellows, and it's linked to an old laptop. I had to, because the projector, what's it called, the scanner was so old, I had to find a really old laptop to run the kind of processor through it or something like that. And it essentially scans the projected image onto the glass of the scanner, and you get these really weird and wonderful kind of images from it, basically. And that's my youngest, and she doesn't look that creepy in real life. I chat this in because I was around this time. I've always been a big Heath Robinson fan, and this was a little bit. I was, like I said, just taking things apart and just putting them back together. And my windscreen washers in my car broke. So a lot of it's like reusing stuff, recycling. Like, how can you put things to kind of? I don't like throwing anything away. Or maybe later on, if there's time, I'll give you a tour of my studio here, and you'll see the amount of boxes of just stuff. And I'm a classic hoarder of, like, oh, that will come in useful one day. Anyway, so this was my kind of obsessive camera making phase, essentially. But like I said, it was what was interesting during this time is that the reactions I was getting from cameras were way more meaningful to me than any of the reactions I had from people seeing the photographs that I'd made before, because that stuff was very serious. It's quite macho. It's quite kind of, you know, it's like, I am an explorer. I am taking photographs and I'm showing them to the world, which isn't really me. I'm, you know, a bit more sensitive, a bit more feminine than that, you know, ultimately. And like I said, I'm more interested in, I'd rather make someone laugh or smile than make them kind of think really seriously. You know, again, there are people that are best placed to really challenge people's kind of thoughts about things and take them to a really deep or dark place. That's not really me. You'll probably get that impression as we go. like I said, I can always feel myself rambling, and we'll be here all night if I'm not careful. So I'll skip through some of them. This around about this camera obsessive making time was what my kitchen dining room looked like. So, and we had a kid on the way, and this was not going to wash anymore with my partner. So I needed a studio. I needed to move out from the various shipping containers and things that I was sort of functioning in at the time. And my desk at work was looking equally bad. So I had a friend that's got this junkyard, and he lent me this room, basically. We cleared it out, painted it, give it a bit of spruce up, and then I built this shed camera, essentially. So that large format, the big 16 by 20 one I showed you, I won't bore you with the details, but there was a lot of technical elements of that made it really impractical. It was very slow to work with. You had to be near a dark room. It could only load one piece of paper at a time. So, and I was starting to think, well, actually, if I could be inside the camera, then I've got a lot more control. So I built this shed basically on wheels. There's a lens at the front and the film, a sensor in the middle, and it's essentially a kind of camera obscura. And I'll talk a little bit more about what a camera obscura is in a moment. I'm sure most of you will know, but for anyone that doesn't. And I set some lights up the front, just started calling on friends who lived around the area. Hey, can I take your portrait? And was making paper negatives. So making a negative onto paper. Paper negatives, film negatives, it's basically the same thing. It's a different material, slightly different chemicals, but the base is still the same. But it's cheaper and it's quicker and it's a lot easier to work with. And I pretty much exclusively work with photographic paper. But the other one thing that's really interesting about this is that the negative is 60. These ones are 16 by 20 inches. So the detail that you can capture in that, like a digital, a piece of film in a normal 35mm camera is like this big, a digital sensor in a SLR full frame is about that big. The digital sensor in your iPhone is tiny, tiny, tiny. There's only a certain amount of information it can capture. The negative is this big. It's capturing an insane amount of information. And I mean, this is through a screen, so you might not be able to see too well, but this is the kind of detail that this paper's capturing. And it's infinite. There's no enlargement or kind of reproduction. It's the paper, the print is the print. So a camera obscura, really quickly, I'm going to let this video play. Yeah, turn the volume off. So a camera obscura is, camera means room or chamber in Greek, and obscura dark. So it's literally a dark room. And you can make one so simply by blacking out a room, putting a lens, or even just a hole, an opening, like a pinhole. And then the image from outside, depending on the focal length of the lens, if you're using a pinhole, you don't have to worry about that, projects inside the space. And that board you can see there is a board that I've made, and I can cover that whole piece of paper, that whole thing in a piece of photographic paper to register an image. One of the problems about being stuck in that weird, horrible, dark, damp basement was I was stuck. I couldn't, and it was, it's in the middle of a junkyard on the edge of Exeter. So I conceived of my caravan camera, which is essentially that shed thing, but with the darkroom, because with that shed, the darkroom was separate. So I would shoot inside the camera, put the paper in a bag, take it into a darkroom. Whereas my caravan, so I bought this caravan off eBay for £150, stripped it out, rewired it, put some lights in, painted it black, chucked a lens in the back, painted it white on the outside, got a friend of mine to give it quite a fancy paint job. And this was my caravan camera. And in this camera, people stand outside. Their image is projected on a screen on the inside. You can place a piece of photographic paper on that screen, and at the back of the darkroom, so the picture on the bottom left there is where the back of the caravan is where the darkroom is. So it's essentially like a kind of the world's biggest, slowest, and most impractical. Actually, it's not the biggest and slowest and most impractical, because that's some other ones that are coming later in the talk. But it's a big, slow kind of Polaroid camera, conceptually at least. You take someone stands in front, you take the picture, we come inside, and we develop it together. And what was really interesting about this space is that this is where the kind of it all came together, and those things that were missing when I was making that American work, not that I knew what they were, kind of came together, and also I realized what was missing and what I kind of needed. And it's these three things that I'm most interested in, passionate about within photography. And image making, obviously, so the composition of and creation of an image, that's kind of core to being a photographer. But process, making, the physicality of the building of the thing, the operating of the thing, being able to literally physically operate and move and lift a thing up and hold, like being physical in when I'm making. So the kind of process-led and practical sides of it, but then this social element and this kind of where I could bring people into this space and I could share as a teacher, but also facilitate, as in allow other people to operate that. So I'd often bring in groups or individuals and essentially teach them how it works and go, right, over to you, you can start making pictures. And that was something I got really interested in. So here's a handful of photographs I took with the Polaroid, with the caravan camera. And this was a kind of residency I had down on the quay in Exeter. And of course it travels, it's been all over the country. And I can, it's been on all sorts of different adventures and journeys. So I have recently handed it on to somebody else. So of course, if you can turn a shoebox into a camera, or a pineapple, or build a shed, or you can turn a caravan, you can do anything. So then I went off on this new obsessive journey of transforming other spaces, often with my students. This is the lift in the classroom, which we turned into a camera, set up a little darkroom on the other side of the room, making portraits in the class. This was a balcony at the Wex store in London, which I just covered in cardboard, made a little room within it, and put a lens in it, had a darkroom inside, making portraits. This was a flat pack. I've got a version of this. This is basically giant cardboard, but it's a cardboard box made out of other cardboard boxes. And again, it's all operating in the same way. It's just a big space with a lens. You can make an image inside. Usually, and this is when I was really starting to focus on having the darkroom inside the camera. Well, that's what was happening with the caravan, and because again, there's this immediacy to it, and that's it. It flat packs quite well. This one, that's my cardboard camera packed up. Shepherd's hut on a college trip. And then I love, this one, I didn't have a screen to hold the paper. This was a last minute. So I was like, oh, that'll do. And we just bashed that together. Gaffer tape solves all of my problems. So that's inside the space. You put the paper there, and hopefully you're starting to get the picture. I know I'm whizzing through this. I've said to Mark that I'll save this presentation as a PDF and share it with Mark, so you can, if people want to sort of come back to images or whatever, you can do. So these are some of the images we made with the Shepherd's hut camera. Phone box. This is my guerrilla approach to photography. So I kind of turned this phone box into a camera, and then would stop people. I couldn't fit the trays, so I repurposed the desk organizer for the different trays of chemistry. And yeah, we'd just stop people walking by and take a picture with the phone box. And then I'll skip to this was a kind of, again, another sort of residency where I wanted to focus, build a bit more of a project or a kind of series, I suppose, rather than just build a camera here, take a couple of pictures, whoever's around. So this was an old sort of gallery space that I used to run in Exeter. So I took it over, sectioned, put a fake wall in the middle, had a darkroom one side with the camera, and then a studio out the front. And then could make portraits inside the camera. And this was a project focused on the the independent quarter in Exeter. So these are all kind of local business owners who, Dan is a screen printer, Calcadan owns a kind of ethical fashion company. The young lady on the left, whose name I forget, worked in this beautiful Mexican restaurant. The guy, that's Les, I think, tattoo artist. And I wanted to kind of create a bit more of a series. I mentioned at the beginning that there's a couple of key experiences for me. So one of them is in terms of how I really then started to open up this way of working and thinking more about this more collaborative and facilitative kind of, bringing other people and allowing space for other people's ideas and creativity to kind of flourish in that space, and the kind of win-win that comes with that. And this is a place in Margate called the Garden Gate Project, and it's a community garden that works for people with mental ill health and or learning difficulties. And Jason Evans, the photographer I mentioned earlier, and I collaborated on a project there. That's Jason in the wheelbarrow, where we worked with the gardeners. So this was a beautiful place where there's there's no hierarchy. So whatever your ability, you just get to work basically. And there are volunteers, and there are clients, and there are a few people that are paid workers. But everybody just does what they can, within their abilities. So we had this idea to make a series of still lifes and things around the garden. And what the key thing here was, I come from this kind of Western traditional art school education where you learn the rules of composition, wall effect and symmetry and pattern and shape and all these kinds of things. And when you're teaching photography within an institution, within a framework where there's an assessment criteria, your students need to show their understanding of these conventions of photography or art, whatever it might be. And they have to evidence that, because you have to mark them against that. So you kind of do have to, and a good teacher will be creative with this, but the challenge is to kind of make sure that people evidence their understanding while still retaining their kind of creative kind of excitement, I suppose, and it doesn't become too formulaic. There is that classic thing, you do need to learn the rules before you can break them. But it is challenging at times, especially when you've got 5 classes and 25 students in each kind of thing. Anyway, within this project, there was no criteria, there was no, you know, conventions that we need to follow. No one's getting marked. So this is Andy. He was the first person to make a photograph. Jason was kind of art directing this, and I was operating the camera. But for this first one, he's like, "Oh, Brendan, I've got to go and do something. Can you just help Andy build his sculpture and photograph it?" So Andy builds this kind of weird contraption, and my brain is going, "This doesn't work. It doesn't follow the conventional rules. You know, and you should put that there, and or maybe move that to the left a bit." But of course, it wasn't about what would work or what would look right. It was about what Andy wanted to produce. So I stood back and was like, I'm not involved. This is not my place to interfere. And of course, the results were magical and didn't follow any of the conventions of kind of, you know, that we're used to. And they are really unique. And, you know, a lot of the people that work here are, you know, quite severely on the autistic spectrum. So they're working within their own logic and the confidence of kind of, no, that goes there, or no, I want this like this. And it was really like freeing to see people just feel like just operate in a kind of, in this non-conventional way, and it was a real privilege to kind of witness that, essentially. So we made these series of still lives with things that we found around the garden. And then there was this other element. It was funded actually by Jason, who's a quite successful fashion photographer, or part of his multitude of, you know, skills, I suppose. Was commissioned by this German fashion magazine to produce, you know, a fashion shoot. And he said, "Okay, I want to do it in this garden, and I want to do it with Brendan and shoot it with a caravan." And they were like, "Okay, fine." So we made, alongside this, we made these series of fashion images with using, you know, the gardeners as models. And again, using the things that we found around the garden. And this is the view inside the camera obscura. And this, that's Nathan. He looks so dignified and beautiful in this picture. And, you know, the wonderful thing about this is that's a £3,500 Hugo Boss jacket. You know, and it's just been worn on a really hot day in this garden in Margate, which I just love. And these ended up in this feature in this magazine, which is really wonderful. We had an exhibition in the record shop in Margate and sold jams that the gardeners had made in the garden, and had a little party at the end, which was just magical. The other key experience, or one of these key experiences, this thing I touched on maybe once or twice already, which is getting, you know, stepping out of the way a little bit, handing over as much creative control as possible to others. So I had this project. This is featured actually in a documentary that Ilford's Photo, the, you know, chemistry and black and white chemical and paper company, made about me a few years ago. And this is an abandoned control tower near Exeter, where I live. And I took a group of 4 ex-students there for the day. And the idea was that we would transform the space into a camera and make some pictures with it. And it was, you know, we were filming it as part of this bigger project. But the thing that I did at the beginning of the day was that I taught the student, I slowed everything down, and I said to them, right, this is, you know, here's a bunch of gaffer tape and some cardboard, black out that room, I'll be back in a bit. And then I went in and I taught them through, right, this is how it works. You open the lens, expose there, there's a tray of chemistry, that's your developer, you kind of know some of this, off you go, good luck. And I was just hanging around doing other things in the building. But what I did, and because there was space for it here, was I resisted the temptation to go in and they were having problems, things weren't working, exposures weren't coming out. But I resisted the temptation to go in and just fix it. Oh, this is what's wrong, do this. Oh, okay, thanks. And it would have made things a lot quicker. The results would have been more, you know, better, professionally, better exposed, and got there quicker. But I would have taken, the thing about that, you're giving someone knowledge, but you're also taking away their opportunity to learn and solve the problems themselves. And we all learn, you know, we learn from our mistakes, but the satisfaction that comes from like solving a problem and arriving at a successful outcome, like, you know, the danger of, you know, a bad teacher that's something that someone, you know, it's an opportunity for someone to have a really rich and meaningful learning experience. And there's the danger of taking that away from someone. And that's something I work really hard to do, is to not take things from people, but allow space for them to create. And then we made these weird and wonderful still lives with things that we found around the space. Again, like, you know, a lot of this is, there's this kind of evolution. This is why I wanted to present this like a journey, like one project feeds into and leads and informs the one before. And then at the end of the day, we all stood back, cracked open a beer, they were all over 18, and looked at all these pictures that we made. And what was this magical thing happened for me, which was, I realized, and again, this sort of inspired the talk, the title of the talk, that I had created the space for these young people to create something within. So I had this sense of satisfaction and joy. I made this space, I made this. And then they made things within that space. But their creation, what they made, and their sense of satisfaction and pride and joy and connection to that thing, like my creation didn't take anything from them. And the analogy, or the kind of thing I always use to describe this is, my parents have in their hallway at home my A-level art exam still life painting. And it's a painting of a generic, like a skull and a flower and a backdrop and a thing. And everyone, and it's fine. I got, you know, it's an okay painting. I'm not a good painter, but it's fine. Everybody looks at it and goes, oh, that's, yeah, nice. Oh, the skull is beautiful. Oh, that's really beautiful. My art teacher did the skull. He came over my shoulder one day and was like, well, there you go, skull's better now, and walked off. So the painting is better for it, but he took something from me by doing that, because although the painting's better, my like reward and my pride of that painting is diminished because he's done a part of it, and evidently obviously the best part, because he's a fucking professional. I was 18, you know? And that's something I would, you know. And so in this space, it's this, you know, there's this wonderful, like, everyone's a winner. You're giving and receiving at the same time. I'm creating this space, other people are creating things within it. We both win. No one's detracting. You know, it's like a rising tide raises all ships. You know, whatever it is. So then I sort of went in to bring all this all together. So I bought a shipping container, obviously, got some funding for one, and stripped it out. Got some of those students back to help me paint it. Built a wall at the front that moved. Yeah, made some bellows. Built a front standard. This is my students painting again. Painted it black on the inside. Got my friend to give it a nice little paint job as well, make it look kind of funky. And then wired it up and had built a dark room at the back. See the red light, safe flight. And this one, the thing I wanted to ensure with this one that it was wheelchair accessible. So it's got a little door in the wall there that you can enter out quickly, but the whole front element moves so it's wheelchair accessible, and yeah, so more people can operate it. And then I hired a crane, and this is a very, very satisfying moment. Dropped it in the. Ooh, I'm just trying to turn the volume off that. Dropped it in the middle of Northern Hay Gardens here in Exeter, and embarked on a kind of 3-week project where I would photograph people, members of the public who might be wandering by, who were stopping for a portrait, but also like ran series of workshops and sessions with different local groups. So the college students, I worked with students from the Deaf Academy, a group called the Pelican Project, who I work really closely with. They work with young people with a range of learning difficulties. And, you know, in various different kind of local kind of school groups and community groups, running different workshops and sessions. So it was kind of, you know, bringing a lot of these things from these previous projects together. And over that's it there. You can see it in the middle of town. And yeah, this is the biggest, most impractical Polaroid camera. And then, as I said, set off and made a series of portraits over this sort of 3-week period. And you get these moments with this. That's the magic of the camera obscura.
Okay, gently on this, guys, gently. Oh. We just got it up here. Okay, everyone move back so we can get the focus. Careful on the board, remember?
So that's a big part of my job, like basically showing people really cool things that just get them really excited. So it's a really cool. And they weren't booked in, actually. They were just walking by on like a trip to the museum or something, and the 26 primary school kids all piled in.
That's what they'll remember. They'll remember that more than the museum.
And then these are the series of the photographs that I took with it. And then so I made, oh God, how many now? It was over 100 photograph portraits over that period. Some groups, there's a group of students from the college. And that's my firstborn. And then at the end, that wall that moves, we pushed that right to the back, and then had an exhibition of the photographs inside the camera, and then invited people into the space and had a little party, and everybody gets. Anytime I do this, I keep the negative for my archive, and the portrait, the positive image, which I'll talk maybe a little bit about how you make the positive from the negative contact. I contact print them inside the camera. Basically, everybody gets that picture afterwards. So, and then it went back and is resting back at the junkyard just down from my old studio. I then got the opportunity I got approached it was around about this time, and it was the most weirdest email in my life. Would you be interested in turning the 46th floor of a skyscraper in Midtown Manhattan into a camera and take a photograph of New York skyline? So,
that's a job.
Yeah. They had actually seen the film of the control tower video with the students in that abandoned building. And it was this film production crew from LA, or this kind of film crew or a production company from LA who had access to this clear floor. So the whole floor was stripped back to as you can see here. And they wanted to produce a short film about this space and with a creative element to it. And there was I think there was some kind of promotional side to it that I was involved in. But and basically they made this short film. It's on YouTube about me working with a group of 20 young people from 2 local foundations around New York, where we transformed this whole space. So there's the view across the Empire State Building. So we blacked out 160 windows. Made the whole 360-degree space pitch black, set up a dark room inside, gave everyone head torches because it's a big space to move around in. Of course, they're red lights. So if anyone's ever working in a dark room, bike light head torches, perfect, really good hack. Chucked a lens in, and the great thing, this building was kind of octagonal shaped, so it had all these multiple different views, so we could just cut a hole in the board, put the lens in, photograph that view, then tape up that hole, move the lens, put it somewhere else. And this is when I really started. This was the first time I'd worked at scale, and I love working at scale, big. And not just because I think big is better, but the bigger you go, the more problems you have to solve, and I love solving problems. So, and the mad thing about this is that, that's the videos I played. So we were making these exposures, so the same process, black and white paper, but instead of 16 by 20 inch sheets of paper, we were using 50 by 100 inch sheets of paper, processing them in troughs and creating these giant paper negatives, which we would then contact print by placing the negative. So you can see above on the top there of the image is the negative, which we would place on a fresh sheet of photographic paper and then shine light through it using a very advanced approach, which is basically waving a bunch of phone torches over the top of it as a rudimentary enlarger. And then that would create a positive image from the paper negative print. We also used a paper called Harman Direct Positive paper, which it skips the negative stage basically, so you get this direct positive image. And these are some of the images that we made. This was a 4-hour exposure looking down at Park Avenue in the middle of the night, and that's Park Avenue. So that's all the cars from Park Avenue driving up and down. That's the negative from that image. Oh, that's a better version of it. Yeah. It's a little bit underexposed. It should have been 8 hours.
That is fabulous, honestly.
And that's with the direct positive paper. And the detail you can see, I showed you that image earlier on of the close-up of the person's eye. This is a 50 by 100 inch sort of negative. There's, like I said, it's not enlargement of any kind. So it's the same as taking a sort of telephoto lens and taking like 1,000 individual pictures and then stitching them all together. You get the same resolution as this. It's essentially like there are very, very few, only kind of, some Hubble in their massive telescopes that capture an image of this much resolution, essentially. This is a poor quality iPhone video of the print coming through the internet, so you won't get a real sense of the quality of the image, but you can get a sense maybe of some of the detail that you can capture. You can almost read the number plate on the cars, like 46 doors below. And then we transformed at the end. I put multiple lists, so then filled. We back the whole space as it was, and then I put 13 lenses, individual lenses around the space, each with its own sort of screen, to create this kind of immersive, multi kind of view-dimensional kind of camera obscura installation that you could kind of walk through. And each of these, little spots of light and screens and different views around the New York skyline. This was for this installation that came afterwards. And that's the lovely group of people I was working with. I'm going to rush through this one because I'm already kind of realizing that I'm kind of coming up to time. There's a few other things I want to get through, but this is essentially a very similar project, but a bit more closer to home. So this was done in a tower block, abandoned tower block in East London. And it was very similar to the previous project. The reason I wanted to, to include this, the previous one, I tried to make it as involved and collaborative as possible. The people that were, but they were more kind of, I would try to hand over some of these like creative decisions to the people, the participants and the students, but often, but there's limitations to what you can kind of do. The camera's fixed and a lot of the technical stuff, I would hand, you do this, you do that, this is how you do this. But some of the creative decision making and actual like kind of mark making almost, or the kind of physical input, or the, it is kind of limited beyond the like technical, roll that there, put that in there. So with this project, I wanted to kind of work with that a little bit more. We did a similar approach, transform various flats in this building. You can see this skyline there, that's looking across the Olympic Village, I think. And we used a local community centre to rinse all the prints and engage the community there best we could, and created these giant paper negatives again. And then when it came to making these positive prints, this is when we sort of got a bit more creative. So this is this is our waving, making the exposure. And then when it came to developing them, rather than putting it through a tray or a trough of chemicals, we basically just poured the chemistry onto the paper. So I gave everyone like a bit of a bucket of chemistry and some sponges and cloths. And we started kind of bringing the image to life in different ways. So the people there are actually physically kind of, their hands or their marks are like they're present in the outcome. So you can start to see the image appear here, and it's kind of selecting different areas to develop, and the result of it, you get these really wild and wonderful kind of marks, and the images are sort of disintegrating, which is interesting contextually because this area of London is, lots of it is kind of earmarked for demolition. So some of these buildings are, in the image and where the chemistry has worked, literally looks like it's kind of disintegrating and falling away. Yeah, we just made these weird and wonderful, wild things. And what was the other nice thing about this project? This was commissioned by, or was kind of funded by the V&A, Victoria and Albert Museum in London, and it ended up, the outcomes for which I built these kind of display stands, and they ended and loaded them up to London, and they ended up as an exhibition of this work in the architecture, on the architecture landing in the V&A. But wow. a lot of the participants, the people involved, and especially the people that will live and are in that community, it's on a housing estate in East London, quite a deprived area. These are not people who go to the V&A, and although there were invitations, there was minibuses put on, the young people and the students who were kind of involved and collaborated in the project, we managed to get most of them there. But there were a lot of other people who were just there watching, assisting, kind of being nosy while we were making stuff. And we were using their space. And so there's this thing in the art world where often people kind of parachute, photographers, artists, whoever it might be, into an area, take a load of photographs, take them away and display them in some fancy gallery somewhere. And the people who are in those photographs and the kind of quarter, they don't get to see them. That's not a space that they feel comfortable entering, and it's not built for them. So we split the work in two. We showed half in the V&A, and the other half we built these planters for and placed them back on the estate. So the tower block, it's not those specific ones, but the tower block is just into the left edge of the left picture there. So they were embedded back on the estate. So people who were there and facilitated and were core to their kind of creation, got to see them basically. They weren't just sort of taken away somewhere else. People always ask me, or used to ask me, what would you like to do? And I always want to do a boat, so I did a boat. This is a barge on the Thames in London. So again, it's the similar approach, but we made some really cool pictures of like long exposures going along the canal bank, and worked with this. It's a charity. Sadly, they've not got their funding, so they've closed down now. But I'm an ambassador for Positive View Foundation. Works with young people from various housing estates around London, and we made this kind of series of portraits along the banks of this canal in London, a cool exhibition. I think there's a couple more of these. I'm going to try and kind of speed things up and come to maybe about 15 minutes left. Is that all right, Mark? Got 15 minutes?
Yeah. It's great. I mean, I'm loving it. I'm loving it. It's brilliant.
I would tell you it would be a bit of a bombardment, so I will cut. It will be be over soon.
Yeah.
This was a project. You know, there's lots of these projects are, you know, go somewhere, work with a group of people over the course of the day, take a series of portraits or landscapes. Well, I got the opportunity of commissioned by an organisation in Bournemouth called Beef, Bournemouth Events Arts Festival, and the idea was to create something more kind of ambitious and overarching. So essentially, the idea was to make a portrait of Boscombe. Boscombe's kind of, you know, fairly rundown part of Bournemouth, but has a real vibrant community there, and it's got a real sense of kind of it's a real, like, there's an element of pride of place. It also gets quite a hard time by the more posher parts of Bournemouth, but there's a real vibrancy there that you don't get in the more kind of, you know, gentrified and kind of homogenized places. And they'd taken over this empty sort of old department store on the high street, and there was this arts festival they were running there, and I built a camera and darkroom in the space. Again, same sorts of thing you've seen so far, but this one, again, I'm always looking to kind of, how can this become richer, deeper, you know, how can I kind of take this approach, this process, and kind of, you know, make it, yeah, richer and deeper. And one of the core parts of this was, so it was about creating this kind of portrait of the community. As I said, so photographing as many people as possible. I was there for about 8 days, I think. Well, it was about 8 days over the 2 weeks of the festival. Maybe it was 10 days over the 14 days. And made multiple portraits of multiple people who came by, and displayed them in the space. So as we went, at the end of each day, we would hang up the prints from that day. So the exhibition sort of built as the week went on. And I think it was 113 portraits are made by the end of the week. But I wanted, you know, this thing of, like, especially when you're not from somewhere. I mean, I did used to live in Bournemouth actually, but that was kind of coincidence really more than anything. And you go into a place and you make a piece of work, and especially if there's this sort of community focus to it, and then you leave again, you know, and that's fine. There's a space for that, but it's also there's a negotiation there, and you know, you want to be careful about the balance between giving and taking. What I'm giving or kind of allowing or creating in that space, and then what I'm taking away. Not just, I mean, obviously I got paid for this, but also like what I'm getting out of it, and trying to just being aware that there's a balance there, and you don't want to feel that you're kind of exploiting or taking advantage of people. It's just something that one needs to kind of be mindful of if you have if you want to have a kind of ethical approach to this kind of work. And one of the core parts of this that I wanted to embed from the start, which I'm really proud of, is basically that physical space, the dark room in this space, which is in the corner of that building. We built that and then left it intact. And during the project, I worked with 2 or 3. Each day I'd have 2 assistants. One who was the same, Georgia. She stayed with me every single day. And then each day we'd have a second, a student or a volunteer. And over the 8 days, I trained up Georgia how to operate this camera, use the lighting, use the chemical, position everything, to the point where the last couple of days she was taking some of these photographs, these portraits. And then when I left, Georgia now runs that space and has carried on making portraits and running workshops and courses in that camera. I left the lens, I left the screen, and some. They had their own lights and the trays, and they had a stock of chemistry and paper left that was left in the job. So there's this legacy there, and it's continuing, and other people are still operating in that space, which I'm really proud of. I think this is the last in this kind of section. I'll do a quick thing about the personal project and then a little touch on everything at the end, and then we'll be done. This is the last big project I've done. This is definitely the largest scale project. And this again was inspired by and evolved from the previous project, from the beef project on the yellow room there. And this was a commission for working on the Regent's Park estate, which is a housing estate, biggest housing estate in Camden in London. And basically, transformed. I took over a ground floor, 1-bedroom flat on this estate, and in a building that had been earmarked for demolition because of HS2. There's a lot of social issues on this estate. There's a lot of issues around gentrification and development. And I was commissioned by an organisation there called ODAC, who had commissioned a number of artists to work collaboratively with members of the community to create public artworks for a public art trail. So there's 12 or 13 different artists on this public trail. And my proposal, which was accepted, was to transform this space, make a series of portraits with with the people from the estate. But also what happened within this project was some of the people who would live there were not, for maybe personal or often cultural or even legal reasons, didn't want to or wouldn't be appropriate for them to be featured with their faces in the photograph. So the portrait, the video showing this family here, this is 4 generations of the same family. So there's baby, daughter, mum, and great granddad there. And so yes, so I said we made a series of portraits of different members of the community. But then also for those that didn't want to have their face in the portrait, we asked people to bring objects, heirlooms, things that were important to them, that could represent them or their connection to the place. So the figurine there, that's Christie's grandmother's figurine. The picture on the right is Steve's cat's ashes. And so this cat would have roamed this estate. That's called Big Bert. It's a little plaque at the front of it. The lady holding the photograph, that's Hannah. That's a photograph of her father who passed away when he was, sorry, that's a photograph of her mother. She had photographs of her father as well. They both passed away. She's holding. And Bettina, the lady on the left, that's her. She's from Eritrea, and she's holding her grandmother's a necklace that she bought from a market there when she visited for the first time. Oh, when first time she'd been back since she was a baby, I think. And then the other thing we did is also I asked people to bring. We would go. Sometimes when I would walk around the estate with people, and we would gather wildflowers and weeds and bring them back and arrange them into vases and photograph them as well. And what we ended up with is this wonderful array of portraits and objects and heirlooms. There's a few sort of photographs here of key historical members. There's a photograph of 2 ladies from the estate that weren't able to physically come, so we took a photograph of them and photographed that. The bottom right picture is a picture of an ultrasound. So Baja, who was one of the community champions, who's in here somewhere, she was heavily pregnant while I was making these pictures, and we were joking, I was there for about 6 months on and off, and we were joking about, oh, will we be able to get the baby in the pictures? And she went into labor my last day of shooting. So Mohammed wasn't born in time. But the day before then, I basically, we messaged Baja and said, oh, can you send us a picture of your ultrasound, which we then printed out and then photographed. So and then there's another photograph in here of a lady called Hillary, who's 99 years old. So we have one photograph with 4 generations of the same family, a photograph of an unborn baby and a 99-year-old lady as well, who had lived on the estate all her life. And this is oh, it's a great song anyway. This just gives a bit of a sense of the vibe of the project and the people that were involved. Trying to skip it. It's not skipping. Well, what's happening, do you think?
It's stopped here. How can it stopped?
Yeah. Oh, okay. Here we go. Oh, there we go. And this resulted, so all of those pictures we brought together and ended up presented on the side of this building. So we gathered all of these different portraits of 72 and still life, 72 images all together. Turn that volume on. And plastered them. This is 6.6. That's Baja. There she is. 6.6 by 7.7. That's Steve. That's Steve's cat's ashes picture. And plastered on the side of this building on the estate. And what was really magical, I spent the day there, you know, installing it, and just seeing all the people from the community coming by, going, oh my God, there's me, there's my, you know, I made that picture, there's my daughter, oh, that's my uncle up there, which was a really magical thing. But again, this thing about wanting things to be as collaborative and people to be involved in the creation of things as possible. So there was something, you know, there's essentially here I'm making the images, but I always want things to be as involved and collaborative as possible. So there was this other element to this project I introduced, where essentially these portraits, we printed them out, handed them to people, had run a series of workshops where people would come in, I'd print out multiple versions of their portrait, and they would bring them to life in these absolutely wonderful, wild, you know, they just transform these pictures from, you know, fine, good, black and white traditional photographs into something so much more richer and vibrant. And this produced a zine. So I have a bunch available for sale on my website if anyone wants a copy. So £15, I think, yeah. And produced this and gave everybody, every person who participated, a copy of the zine that celebrates the kind of vibrancy, the colour, the life, the kind of, you know, individuality of the people there, and again brought it to life in a different ways, and again thinking about accessibility and how people can access things, and I'm working on a website as well. This is on my website, but I'm doing a dedicated page where some of the stories, because obviously a lot of these heirlooms and artifacts and objects, you know, they're void of context, so you don't know these things. So I'm working on a sort of web page where you can kind of learn a little bit about the, not necessarily the people, but yeah, some people, they want to, those that have, you know, opted to share stories of, you know, of their connection to the estate and the objects that they bring. And I'm gonna do a quick 5 minutes on this other element, because that's all that, you know, like I said at the beginning, I had this fine art practice, this kind of collaborative approach, and then this other element, which I'll touch on very briefly at the end. And what's kind of important for me is these three different elements all feed into each other. It's not like three different jobs, it's three different kind of approaches or ways of working or operating that inspire and feed other things. So my fine art practice essentially tends to exist more in a kind of color space. And it was sort of came about initially when I discovered this process. So this is RA4 reversal process. So those of you that understand anything about working in a darkroom, that when you have a black and white negative, if you put it in a tray of chemistry, it shouldn't turn into a color positive image in daylight. But lo and behold, this process does allow for that to happen. And it's wild and it's magical and it's wonderful and it defies all, well, when you understand the science of it, not that I do very well, it does make sense. But again, for people that have never kind of experienced, you know, it just doesn't make sense when you understand the kind of, you know, the traditions or the normal conventional way of making imaging. So lockdown, I just discovered and was playing with this process, and lockdown happened. And this was in January 2020. I had left my full-time, or I'd gone part-time at that point, but I'd left my salary teaching job to work fully self-employed running these kind of projects. So it was just after, it was the year after the shipping container project, the New York project, you know, and I was like running and rolling with lots of these different kind of engagement projects, and I was set up to work in a skyscraper in London, working with this foundation I mentioned earlier that I was working with, and then lockdown happened. So gathering groups of people together in confined spaces with little or no ventilation was not that conducive to the situation that the world was in at the time. So of course I turned my garden shed into a camera, built a dark room inside it, and then what do you photograph? I photographed my partner, who was pregnant with our second at the time, and my daughter. I photographed my neighbours over the hedge, so just on the right of the picture there is their hedge, so I've got this cool picture, I should have included actually, them with their heads over the fence. But then I run out of people, so we were going on our daily walks, and we started collecting flowers, and I would photograph them. I would work at night, because I had to have lots of chemistry and trays and stuff around, and working with trays of open chemistry with a curious toddler walking around was not very practical. So when B was in sleep, I would work through the night, and of course it was so quiet. There was no cars on the road, no planes in the sky, and I just had this so many you know, we were super privileged. You know, we had a small garden space. We live in a relatively safe kind of area, so I thought to acknowledge that, you know, I was in a, you know, lucky space, and a lot of people had a lot harder time through lockdown. So I don't want to trivialize the experience of others, but for me, it was, you know, it was a rich experience. You know, I got to connect with my young family and make this work. And so I used this color reversal process. And this was, I think, was maybe the first picture that I made. We'd gone out for a walk that day. We picked some flowers. We put them into a vase, and there's these pictures started appearing. And it was the first personal project, you know, series of photographs that worked together that I had made since the work that I'd made in America. You know, probably 8 years before at this point, maybe 7 years before. Yeah, 8 years before. And it was the first time I felt connected to a subject matter, you know, and that I wanted to kind of continue. And so I made this series of photographs. It's titled Flowers for Bee. I've just been in Italy last week printing the book of this work, which I have the unbound first. This is previously unseen. This will be a series of those photographs. This, like I said, just come hot off the press. I'm going to post from Italy yesterday, and that will be bound together. And I'm publishing that book in September, October this year. And these are, yeah, a series of photographs on that. I moved slightly after this, working in the shed for a while. I got access to this old abandoned sort of empty gym in Exeter, where I continued the series, had a bit more space to operate in, could work in the day, because I didn't have to worry about bead falling in trays of chemicals, and continued this series of photographs, working again with colour, as I said. And I would go out, like I said, each day, arrange these flowers into vases, and photograph with two processes. So I would make the positive image of that reversal process, and then also a negative image. And then because I like working at scale, I started working a little bit, taking the scale up a little bit and kind of becoming a bit more experimental. This is the really unique material, the Duratran. So it's designed for light boxes, but it's chromogenic C-type, so it's chemical based rather than, you know, digital printing. And then I started again. I was interested in this, and this I mentioned a moment ago, and I was showing you that video of us pouring the chemistry over the picture, you know, in that tower block in London. And, you know, so these are ideas that I'll have had or been, you know, discovered somewhere else or be playing with, and I'll explore them maybe within my own practice, and then we'll embed that in a collaborative project, or the other way around. You know, we'll decide or discover something together collaboratively, which will then kind of feed into, you know, the way I work individually in the studio. So there's this, you know, and the lines I'd like to kind of, although this is, you know, I am making this on my own in the studio, you know, its inception, its kind of roots, its kind of foundations come from all sorts of different places, often a collaborative place. And this is, so these marks, these kind of artifacts and edges and things. So this is my current studio, which is where I am now, which is in this community art centre that I run, and where again I can work. I've got a bit more space. It's a bit more set up. So this is what I've built. That's the old wall from the shipping container, which I've repurposed for in here. And this is this sort of another series, still working with flowers, but working a bit more scale. They're more like, I see these more like portraits of flowers. And again, you've got this like that thing about detail. So again, it's a kind of, you know, video, but you can, this material, it's called Fujiflex. It's the paper, and it has a super high gloss. And the detail that these images register is just magical. You get these wonderful stains and marks just through the way that I process them. So this is a kind of project I'm working at the moment. I've not made sense of it. I'm about 3 years into this, and I'm probably another 3 years from finishing it. And it's a slow process because it's hard to make them and to find the time with all things going on, but it's something I'm kind of working on at the moment. And again, the detail in these images are just something I really like. That my thing is like pushing the kind of the process and like how can you maximize its kind of you know, its qualities, whatever they might be. And then I just included this at the end of this section because core to what I do is my favorite thing in the world is building the thing that I need to make the thing. So you can't, nothing, I need the materials or equipment that I need. You can't just buy on the shelf. You can buy lights, but nothing powerful enough. You want something to hold the paper, you've got to make it out of a weird old board attached to a thing, and you know, lifts in certain ways. So this is a lighting rig that I built recently because I wanted to, for various technical reasons. The paper is super slow. It has an ISO, effective ISO somewhere between 1 and 3. My lenses are really slow because of the scale of them. They're maximum aperture of f9, some f16. So you need lots of light. So this is an 18,000 watt power light rig that I built recently. Because I wanted to create these with those color flower images, they take multiple flashes. If you have 1 or 2 lights, you need to fire them like 10 times to get exposure. And I wanted to work with 1 flash to get these crisper images. And that's for this new project or new side thing I'm working on, which is essentially dried flowers. I've got all of the flowers I've ever photographed just sitting in various vases over there, but I needed something to light them properly. So I procrastinate a lot by making things that I need to make things. The balance is often skewed more to making the thing rather than the actual photographs. But so yeah. And then this is the very last bit, and it is relevant, and it's, as I said, it's core to the way I operate. So I run this community arts centre in Exeter called Positive Light Projects with another guy, George Barron. We run it together. And it's a creative hub. We have a large ground floor workspace. It's open and accessible. We hire it out. We run our own projects in there. There's 2 floors of artist studios and offices, and we're home to a few local organisations and individual artists. And we run kind of, you know, creative projects, and whether we seek our own funding to deliver things, or we're commissioned by other organisations to deliver things to either their group or run a bigger project, or we're just a space for hire where we facilitate other projects happening. For instance, starting tomorrow, we have a 6-day mini festival for migrant for families, focus on, open to everyone, but a focus on various migrant families around Devon, where there's a bunch of drop-in art sessions and classes and things like that. And then the last thing I think within this is that, so this is a project called Pelican Portraits, which we do every year. So I built this camera on the right, it's kind of custom built large format 8x10 inch camera that's got various ways of being able to be operated by people with limited mobility and dexterity. And we'd make people's portraits, take them into the darkroom, develop them, and then, you know, add color and life to them. And this came before the London project. So that London project, that idea to develop and work into and color the pictures, came organically through this collaborative project with the Pelican project. And they started off as collages, and then we were using paint pens, and this was, you know, and so this was inspired by this project the London project in Camden with the zine. This one was inspired by the Pelican project, and that ended up as a piece of public art here in Exeter in the closed down Devon building. And I've just built, well, I say just, it's a couple of years old now. We have a dark room here now, which we've built, and we've started to run things in, and just got a little bit of funding to make it more accessible, i.e. set up a kind of booking system to allow people to come into the space and use it. So as I said, I was going to talk about my fine art practice, the kind of more collaborative space in the middle, and the kind of facilitating, you know, other activity in this workshop. So basically, the kind of I'm either like making pictures, helping other people to make pictures, or helping other people to help other people to make pictures, and that I think is everything.
Brilliant stuff, Brendan. Brendan, that is so good. That's one of the best presentations I've seen. For, you know, it was lovely. It's right up my street. And guys, don't forget. Right, so now's the time to put the questions in. By the way, if you want to ask a question, there's a 30-second delay, so start typing now. Please go over to Brendan's socials, website, etc. There's the details there, and obviously you've got it on the slide there.
I just realised that email address. The email address for Positive Light Project's wrong, so ignore that. But you can use me on the other one. Yeah,
the other one over there. But go and sign up to Brendan's mailing list, and at the bare minimum, follow his work on Instagram. It just blows your mind. It just blows your mind. It's absolutely superb. I love it. I absolutely love it, Brendan. It's really, yeah. I mean, I've wrote down here, living the dream. You're kind of like, you're living the dream, aren't you? You're living the dream. Because that's where I started back in the 90s in a dark room, and done all of that experimenting with making cameras and prints from all sorts of weird things. and I loved it. Absolutely loved it. So to watch you doing it is absolutely joyful, I'm telling you. We are, let's see. I don't think, do you know what? I'm not sure if anyone's got questions because I don't know what you would ask. Oh, I've got a question. That reverse process with the color, what was it called again?
It's called RA4 reversal process. When I first sort of discovered it, came across the process, you know, this is maybe like 7 years ago, something like that. And there was nothing out there. There was nothing on YouTube. There was like some random blogs with like descriptions, but it was really hard. I was looking for a way to shoot color. It's really tricky making a color negative and then creating color positive for various light balancing reasons. And there's a material called Cibachrome that they don't make anymore. Anyway, I discovered this process. But the reason I say that is now, if anyone's interested, just go on YouTube and type in RA4 reversal process, and there's loads of videos there that all talk you through it and also how to do it. Yeah.
RA4 is in like the letter RA and then
RA4 reversal.
Yeah, that's mental. I tell you, it's brilliant. I don't think anyone's got questions. I know why, because like, what do you ask? I don't know what it's all there. It's not something that people are used to seeing. So, yeah, I don't think people have got questions. But what we have got is lots of people saying how much they've loved this evening. So, we do have one question that's come. Oh, yeah, this is a good question. From Martin Leach here. Leach, sorry. Brendan, how do you know how long to expose the light to the paper neg?
Good question. So this is one of the great things about having a darkroom inside the camera, that you can basically do a test strip. So you can use a light meter. So the paper has an ISO rating. Like I said, black and white paper is 3, generally speaking. Different papers have slightly different ones, but it'll say in the spec sheet in the paper have an effective ISO. So you can use a light meter, and you know, like an external light meter, you know, like you might with a large format camera, or any camera that doesn't have a built-in light meter. But I never do that anymore. I did for a little bit, but I haven't used a light meter in years. My answer to that is I've got a bit of a built-in light meter, so I can take a light reading with my head, brain, eyes within a stop either way. So I can kind of take and I'm working often in similar lighting conditions and things like that. So I can be like, okay, it's quite an overcast day. You know, if I'm opening up to, if it's f9, it's going to need an exposure of about half a second. And I'll be within a stop or two, maybe. So what I'll do is I'll do a test. I'll just put a strip of paper inside the camera, make my exposure, put it into the tray of developer, which is usually right next to me, develop it. And if it's spot on, it's spot on. If I'm a stop out, if it's too dark, it's I've overexposed. If it's too light, I've underexposed. So essentially, it work more like if you've worked in the darkroom making a print, and you're doing your test strips. So you put your neg and your enlarger, and you shine light through onto your paper, and you do your little test strips. Sometimes I'll do that as well, piece of paper, and do a test strip just like you would in the darkroom. But yeah, the short answer is make a test strip and develop it there in space.
Yeah, I've not made a test strip for a few years. I can tell you that much. But I used to love that. Right, there's no other questions coming through, but we have got lots of people going. There's Elisa there, fascinating. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you, Elisa.
And there is Brian, a fantastic insight into something quite extraordinary. Bloody is it all, I'll tell you. Karen there, I totally love tonight. And there's a few more there going up there. Alan, thank you, Brendan, for an interesting presentation. And there's loads there. There's loads coming through there. So so I'm just gonna, you hang on there, Brendan. I'm gonna stop the stream, but I'm just gonna say to everyone, thanks for joining us. I honestly thought that was absolutely amazing, seeing all them projects that you do, and you must just have so much fun at work. It's unbelievable, right?
I'm very lucky.
But thanks for joining us. I'm going to say bye, and Brendan's going to wave as well and say bye, and then I'm going to end the stream. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining.
See you later.